Hello, everyone. We are live. Welcome to show number 9. And the headline topic is resilience, but I have a feeling we're going to be talking about a few other things as well. So thank you, as always, for supporting my channel, my webinar channel. The weeks roll by and we continue to get more and people subscribing to us, which is absolutely fantastic. And you give me lots of ideas of things to talk about. And guess what? I occasionally have a few ideas of my own. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, as I mentioned, headline topic is resilience. Now, it was just a few minutes ago, before we went on air, I thought, actually, I think I know what the word resilient means, but I better just check. So I looked it up in the dictionary, and I was, largely correct, I would say. In fact, it's got at least 2 meanings, so it's quite an ambiguous word, which is not unusual in our English language. Language is a living thing, it evolves. I must say, people who go on and on about grammar, I think they somehow miss the point, because none of us speak in Shakespearean English anymore. Anyway, resilience, it means to recover. That's one meaning. And another definition of it is related to spring back or to bounce back. And it's closely related to elasticity. And because I'm fascinated by elasticity of the brain, that's a definition that I like. But you can choose whichever you want. They mean pretty much the same thing. So this channel's about luck. Most of the talks and articles and seminars that I present now are all based around luck. So it seems a little bit unusual to be including resilience in this, because when you recover or you bounce back from something, that implies that something negative has happened to you, as indeed it does. Well, it need not be as serious as it sounds, or even as serious as it feels at the time. And I'm not minimizing the kind of setbacks that people have at all. And I've spent a lot of time studying them. And the curious thing is that probably, most, if not all, of the clients that I work with, and I can include myself in this as well, we've all had setbacks during our careers and our personal lives that at the time have seemed pretty serious. And particularly so with the sports people that I work with, because to be a professional athlete, to be a world class, you don't get there by just tying up your trainers and going for a sprint around the track once in a while. You get there by putting an awful lot of deep practice in. And according to some researchers, research, by the way, that I don't agree with entirely, but that's in my book, Get Lucky Now. Why? I might touch on that later on. They say that you have to put in 10,000 hours of deep practice to be really competent at something. Well, that roughly equates to about 10 years. So that is a lot of hard work. But the thing is, you see, if you're pursuing a passion, I don't think an elite performer, elite athlete would consider that as hard work. They're actually doing what they choose to do. It is their passion. And without that passion, they probably would not have the willpower to do that. I say that with a slight hesitation because there are some people who have immense willpower and they do manage to become world class, but their careers sometimes are shorter than others because they put so much stress and strain into it. And they often become ill or get injuries just at the worst possible time, which is leading into the Olympics or the Worlds or playing for their national team in an important game or whatever. So back to the resilience, it's going to happen. It's going to happen to pretty much everybody at some point in their life, unless you're very, very extremely lucky. And if you're one of those, please get in touch with me because I'd love to know what your secret is. But if this is going to happen, it's how we handle resilience that is more important than whatever it is that happened to us. Because our bodies and our minds are a lot stronger and than we give them credit for. They're a lot more resilient than we give them credit for. However we evolved, however we were designed, some force recognized that life would not always be plain sailing, and that we would be faced with challenges, many challenges. And what would define the success of our life, or how lucky our life was, would be how resilient, what we learned from these episodes, how it changed our thinking, how it shaped our behaviors, and how it inspired us to go to even greater heights, perhaps higher than we'd even imagined possible. So I've included that in my book, Get Lucky Now, available on Amazon, folks, as I'm sure I might have mentioned once or twice before. And I talk about the 7 secrets of successful people. And there is a secret number 6. I don't actually call it resilience, but I could have done. In fact, I never knew what to call that chapter. I think I called it, in the latest version of the book, the luck factor. And in there, I put in a number of things that didn't, on the face of it, appear to be related, but they all were. And I suppose the thing that linked them all together in this chapter was how we deal with bad stuff. And I use a particular example because I'm a medical doctor by background. I've always been fascinated how some people seem to recover from illnesses completely, or a lot better than other people. And obviously there has to be a reason, and I've never found it. But that hasn't stopped me researching. And when I was researching my book, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, probably when I started writing it, I came across the work of a Dr. Temershock, who comes from North America. And she, for a start, she publishes her research, and she talks and has also talked with worked with terminally ill people, particularly in the field of HIV and in cancer. And I will read some of the conclusions that she came to from my book. She's written her own book, by the way, and it's called, I think it's called The C Patient. And by C, I presume she means the cancer patient. And she identified the characteristics of cancer patients. And she said the first thing she noticed was that they're very nice people. They don't complain. They don't make a lot of fuss. They get on with stuff. And you would think, well, that's wonderful. That's how we would like to be. Well, it is wonderful, but unfortunately, they don't do as well as some other types of people. Now, who are these other types of people? She gives 8 characteristics, and I will quickly read them to you. First of all, these people they're realistic, and they accept their diagnosis and do not take it as a death sentence. They have a fighting spirit and refuse to be either helpless or hopeless. They have changed lifestyles. I'm sure that's quite important. They are assertive and able to get out of stressful and unproductive situations. They're tuned into their own psychological and physical needs, and they take care of them. They're able to talk openly about their illness. Now, as a doctor, that's something that I certainly did notice myself. Some people just do not want to talk about what's wrong with them, and you can understand why. But I think sometimes, whether we like it or not, it's good to get some of these things out, particularly for the men who are sometimes a little more reluctant to show their emotions. They think it's not manly. Well, who cares whether it's manly or not if it helps you to get better quicker? They have a sense of personal responsibility for their health, and they look at their treating healthcare provider, that means to us a doctor or a nurse or a physiotherapist or whatever. They look upon their healthcare provider as a collaborator. So they are taking charge of themselves. I know that many people treat doctors as authority figures, and I can understand why, but I'm not sure that's always appropriate. Doctors, being one myself, I tell you, we are human beings first and foremost, and we don't have any special qualities and powers, even though we might like to think we do. And finally, they are altruistically involved with other people who share their condition. And this seems to be particularly important because it takes their thoughts from themselves and their own suffering to the thoughts of others. And that's a spiritual quality. And there are plenty of other people who have told me, or I've read about, who say that spirituality is one of the things that we all need. And when I work with clients, I do talk about the trinity of mind, body, and soul. It's no good being good at one of those things if the other two areas you leave unaddressed. Now, of course, primarily I'm a mind coach, and what I say, if your head's in the right place, then the body and everything else will usually follow it. So that's what I focus on. But I never forget to mention, I hope, that there are other things that are important in a person making a change or recovering from adversity. So I have a couple of questions from the audience, and thank you very much for posting them. I think they both came in today, and it just gives me 2 or 3 hours to think about them and to try and fit them in somehow. So I'm going to start with a question from Tracy. And she says, what techniques can you suggest for the following? How not to let the negative thoughts, feelings, and emotions of others affect me? Thank you. Well, thank you for thanking me, but I haven't said anything yet. But that's a great question, Tracy. And I kind of almost hesitate to give you my opinion here, but it is only my opinion, and it's for you and others to form your own opinions. But there are people around us, we all know them, who are negative. They have negative thoughts. They can always think of something critical to say rather than something nice to say, particularly about other people. And I actually feel sorry for people like that, because I don't think they can have as much fun in their life as somebody who is rather more positive. Maybe they would argue with me about that, but I think it's a great thing to be positive. I think it helps to release all of those neural peptides and hormones in our brain, all these chemicals that make us feel good. One batch of these chemicals is called endorphins, and anybody who's really pushed themselves hard physically, or even mentally for that matter, will know what an endorphin is. It's this massive sense of relief and well-being when you smash through these metaphorical walls that are barriers to your performance. So, what techniques can I suggest for the following? Well, there are ways to insulate yourself from others. I mean, one can just imagine that one is walking around in a bubble or a shield. I know lots of therapists who do this when they're working with disturbed clients. And what you're telling the brain, I suppose, is that all of this negativity can, come flooding towards me, but it's going to bounce back or dissolve or something because I have my invisible bubble around me. Well, that definitely works a lot of the time, but there will always be a time when you are particularly vulnerable for one reason or another. You're tired, or you're perhaps feeling ill yourself, when these negative thoughts can creep in. And the only thing that I think you can do, Tracy, is to put some distance between you and those people. And the truth is that most of the people who become self-development coaches or therapists of some kind, their circle of friends and acquaintances over the years does tend to change. And probably without even thinking about it, but sometimes consciously thinking about it, some of these people who are the energy vampires are dropped from the circle of friends, which is sad, but people either change or they change, as somebody once told me. So let me know, Tracy, if that answer helped you at all. I do get emails and comments from people after these shows, and I always find it interesting to hear what you think. Otherwise, it can feel a very one-sided conversation to me. And I'm glad to say we've had some pretty successes already, and we're only on show number 9. The other question, which definitely fits into the world of adversity, is from Ian. And I know Ian from previous correspondence, and we've worked together on a couple of things. So thank you for joining the show, Ian. I hope your book, or its books now in plural, I hope they're going well. I'm sure they will be bestsellers, and they certainly deserve to be. So you say, Hi, Steve. Given the nature of human emotions, when do you know you are being resilient? And is dropping back into your comfort zone part of building resilience? Well, that's actually two questions, and so I'm going to have to give two answers to them because they are slightly different. So the first question is, given the nature of human emotions, when do you know you are being resilient? Well, you do know, because being resilient, and I'm going to come onto this a little bit later in the show, because I've got another story to tell you, which will give a bit more insight. But I think that we have been made to be resilient, as I say, whether through evolution or creation, who knows what. So, and we know when we are being resilient. So what will stop us getting resilient? Well, anything that takes us away from our natural state of mind. So anything that, well, let me put it like this. Our brain, in the simplest way, is made up of the conscious mind, which is where we are at the moment because we're talking and listening and thinking and playing and looking at the clock and seeing all these kind of things. This is where we live most of our life. And the unconscious mind is way, way, way more powerful than the conscious. And it's called that because the experts, the scientists say that we can't get into it. Well, they're wrong. Plenty of people have found out that we can. And people find their way into their unconscious mind, or perhaps more accurately, it should be called the subconscious mind. They get there by meditation, by learning mindfulness techniques. They get there by having fun. They get there by being artistic. They get there by being creative. They get there by being in flow, by being in the groove, whatever people call it. This is where we lose the sense of ego, we stop being self-critical, we just get on and we do stuff that we love doing. And we've all been there, we've all done it, we know what it feels like. The difficulty that we have is that it can sometimes be hard to get there because we've got this conscious mind all the time speaking in our ear and talking to us about other stuff that bit of our brain thinks is more important. So, natural state, our default state, Ian, is being resilient. And I've just mentioned some of the things that will take you away from that. And if you just catch yourself thinking about these things, you're already halfway there to becoming resilient again. As long as you know what is going on in your conscious mind, you can, you will start to put filters in place and you will be more aware of the purity of the thoughts that come deeper rather than the rather superficial and shallow thoughts from the conscious mind. The second bit of his question is very interesting. Ian says, is dropping back into your comfort zone part of building resilience? Well, we can all have our opinions on this, and I can only give you my opinion right now. And by the way, we are live. You do have a chat box. You can talk to me as we're going along. And it's never too late to ask your own question. We're about 12 minutes left so far in the show, I think. So is dropping back into your comfort zone part of building resilience? No, I don't think so. I actually think it's the worst possible thing to do, because the comfort zone, it's called that for a reason. It is comfortable, but somebody decided that life is not supposed to be too comfortable. There are times when we all do need to hide away in our cave and rebuild our strength. But it should never become the default pattern of behavior. We, all of us, as I mentioned at the beginning of this show, greatly, greatly underestimate how much more we are capable of enduring, of succeeding, of performing at than we give ourselves credit for. And the thing is that when people have been really tested by, have really had their resilience tested by adversity, that's the first thing they discover. And the crazy thing, to me, let alone anybody else, is that when many people have had terrible things happen to them, literally life-changing experiences, once they have gone through that bouncing back, they springing back, they say, I wouldn't change a thing. I'm now a different person. I see things completely differently. I'm a far more balanced person. Often they will say, I'm a far more spiritual person. Well, isn't it a shame that adversity had to bring those changes to them? But they mean it. They mean it when they say that. I've met these people, I've talked to them, I've seen them, I've read about them. They mean it. So I could use extreme sports as an example as well. You will have seen these horrifying videos that these people put on YouTube of them climbing buildings without any ropes, jumping off tall buildings with only a tiny parachute, rock climbing without ropes, taking extraordinary risks, and most of the time doing it very successfully. But of course, sooner or later, when you push yourself beyond those kind of limits, it'll catch you out. But that's just, so I'm not recommending that you do any of these things, but I'm just telling you, I'm just suggesting to you that that this is just an example of how unexplored our abilities are. So going back to the comfort zone is never going to be the right option for anything more than a short period of time, because we're just going to turn ourselves off from all of the things that are possible. So I hope I've answered your two questions, Ian, there, then I hope they make some kind of sense. And of course, I don't need to give right answers on this show to all the questions. If I can actually get people just to think about stuff, my mission has been done. If I can say one or two tips that might just help people, then that's a bonus. Now, I came across something called the Stockdale paradox, which is what I want to share with you now, because it's very, very closely related to some of the things that I've been saying and you've been posting about. The Stockdale paradox describes adversity in its most extreme, and it's named after Admiral Stockdale from the US Navy, who was a prisoner during the Vietnam War and spent 8 years in the worst jail possible, which was given the euphemistic title of the Hanoi Hilton. I don't think it's anything like any Hilton we might have been to. And during this time, because he was the most senior prisoner, he received probably the most serious maltreatment from his captors. And he did survive his 8 years in captivity. He did survive the war, and he's been interviewed many times about it, and books have been written about him. And if you Google the Stockdale paradox, you'll find a lot of interesting things. So one of the questions that interested me, he was asked, of all the prisoners that you knew at that time, could you tell, just like Dr. Temeshok was looking at the cancer patients, who were the ones that were going to survive and who didn't? He was asked, could you tell who were the people that were going to survive and who were the ones that were going to find life very difficult? And I'm using my words now, but he said something like, well, that was very easy to spot. We had a name for it. The people that we knew wouldn't do well, we called the optimists. Well, that made me take a step back when I read that, because I would have thought optimism would have been useful in building and sustaining resilience, but apparently not. He said, no, the optimists would all be saying, Christmas is coming, don't worry, we'll be out by then. We'll be back to see our families. And of course, Christmas came and went, and they were still in the Hanoi Hilton. No early checkout from there. They said, don't worry, don't give up. Easter's coming. This war's got to end sometime. We'll be out by Easter. They weren't out by Easter, or for the summer holidays to see their kids, or Thanksgiving. No, they were still there, and they didn't do well. So the interviewer went on and said, well, what did you do? And he said, well, this is where it gets a little complicated to explain. The first thing that I disciplined myself to do was to accept the brutal reality of my existence on a day-by-day basis. This wasn't going to go away on its own, and there was no point pretending that it was. Tomorrow would be the same as today, and the day after that would be the same as well. And because he was the senior officer, his captors, they wanted to make films of him, and they wanted him to get in front of a camera and denounce the Vietnam War and give a message to everybody back home, you know, don't come over here, stay with your families, this war's no good, all the rest of it. And he wasn't going to do that. So he would, if the guards hadn't given him a bad beating that day when he was due to go in front of the cameras, he would beat himself up. He would give himself a black eye and a bleeding mouth and all the rest of it, so that when he was on camera, it'd be very obvious to anybody that was watching that he was there because he'd been forced to, and anything he said were words that were extracted under the most severe duress. Well, to beat yourself up like that is quite an incredible thing, and that doesn't bear thinking about. So that is one half of the paradox. Now, the other side of the paradox is, he said, but at the same time, while you're accepting the brutal reality of your day-to-day existence, you must never lose sight of your overarching goal and your overarching belief. And that belief is that one day you will be out of this place. And he said, you have to believe that with an intensity that you've probably never experienced in your life before. So that's what's called the Stockdale paradox. So going back to the two questions that we've had, what techniques can you suggest for the following, Tracy? Well, I suppose the negative people, they might have been the optimists in that case. And I don't suppose he let the optimists with their messages get through to him. And as far as Ian's concerned, hi, Steve, given the nature of human emotions, when do you know you were being resilient? Well, I think Admiral Stockdale knew when he was resilient, and that was in his day-to-day struggling. And his dropping back into your comfort zone part of building resilience. He never dropped back into a comfort zone. First of all, there wasn't one to go to. So I guess we could say that question is left hanging open. So, folks, there we are. That's the show. There's more about this subject in my book. And of course, I should remind you, if I haven't done already, please go to my website. Most of the stuff, I'm always posting stuff, and almost all of it is free, apart from the personal coaching that I do with people. And I try and keep those prices affordable. But also go to my YouTube channel. The last time I checked, I think there's like 170 videos on all kinds of subjects to do with performance and sports and all the things connected to the mind, because that's what I do now. I'm a medical doctor by background, but I now work as a mind coach. So thanks again for your support. In about an hour or maybe even less, this show will be recorded and will be available for download for those of you who couldn't attend live. These shows take place the same time, 6 o'clock in London evening, 6 p.m. in London, every day, every Thursday. So you will get messages from me or through Facebook or one way or the other, and you'll know what the subject of the next show is. And of course, I'm always open to your suggestions. I love to have your ideas so that I can incorporate them in the show. So hope you'll join me next Thursday at the same time. In the meantime, I want you to have a lucky time. I don't want any of these bad things we've been talking about to happen. I want lots and lots of good things for you and all of the people who are close to you. So with that thought, see you next time.